Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Guys, back on to scraping over here on the Monarch Lathe. Seems like the never-ending project, but we are going to get there. Where we left off on this is we were working on the cross slide. We had an issue. The gib that we had after we had done some milling and scraping and putting turkite and everything on the cross slide, the original gib was about 20 thousandths too thin. And to solve that, we made a brand new gib. That was in one of my previous videos. If you'd like to, you can go back and take a look at how we made this out of some cast iron. But now the task is that we are once again trying to scrape the gib into the machine, and that's what we're going to be working on today. So let's get over here and get started. So for those of you that may not be familiar with how the dovetails and the cross slide is set up here on this machine, you notice we have two dovetails on here, okay, side by side. These are parallel. We have scraped these in to where they're on the same level and they're parallel to one another. The cross slide has matching dovetails in it that slide on here. But the challenge that we have, or anybody with a machine maker has, is that you want to be able to adjust this over time because it's going to wear, and as it wears, it's going to get loose. So the way they did that is they make one side where they have a gib in here, and this gib is tapered. On this side of the actual cross slide piece, it has a matching taper in there. And what you do is as it wears, you simply push this in a little bit farther. When you do, because you got a taper running against a matching taper or parallels, it's going to move it in closer. So you can adjust this as it goes. The gib here is what we're working on right now. We've already got the rest of this scraped in, and we got it in here, and we got to get that gib surface scraped in here. Now we've already ground this on the surface grinder, so it should be pretty close, but we still want to get all the little oil grooves and stuff in there like you get with hand scraping. We're going to be using just some dye spotting blue here. This is a Canode 2243. This is a water-soluble blue dye. And I'm just going to put a little dab in my paint tray here. And I like to thin it a little bit. I'm just going to use some Windex here to thin it with. And we'll take a brush here, get some. I'm going to take my brush now here with some blue on it, and what I'm going to do is just kind of get up in here, get some applied up underneath that dovetail. All right, I think we got a pretty good coat in there. I'm going to slide the cross slide on here. We will put our gib in. I'm going to pull it back on there, and I'm just going to start out with, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it in here. The wedge pressure is going to kind of press it in place. I'm going to tap it with a soft blow hammer there to get a good print, then release it. Pull this out, and we're seeing, this is not surprising because we don't have any scrape marks in here yet. This is just a ground surface, but what I am seeing is we're getting some ink transfer all the way up and down it, which tells me it's pretty flat. So a lot of times I just like to do this the first time just to see that I'm flat. We don't get a good print on a ground surface. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to take this over, and we're actually going to put just some scrape marks in there. And once we scrape it the first time, we should be able to get a better print and get an idea of where we actually need to scrape. So let's go over here, and we're going to put our first scrape marks in. I'm going to be using my Biax power scraper here. You could do this by hand, but I got one, I'm going to use it. So we're going to go here and put a crisscross pattern on here. All right, so now we've got the beginnings of a scrape surface here. This should blew up a lot better over there now. So I'll just wipe that off. I'm going to take a stone here, and I'm just deburring this because you get little burrs that scraping action will pull up on it. All right, so now let's take it back over and let's re-blue it again. And this time we should start seeing some high spots perhaps where we can start focusing on scraping off. Let's make sure we got some blue in here. And slide our dovetail in, or our gib in rather. This time I've got my screw set on the back where it's just hitting. It might need to be just a little bit tighter. I'm gonna pull that out just a little bit more so that'll, yeah. And let's see what we got. So, all right, so what this is telling me when I see this is we got all the blue at the top, so our angles are not matching up perfectly. So what I need to do is work on scraping just the top part of this to get my geometry a little bit better. So I'm gonna go back over here and we're just gonna do another crisscross, but this time we're only gonna hit this top part up there where the blue's at. I'm really kind of roughing it here. I'm trying to take a pretty good bit of metal off. I'm not trying to hit individual points and stuff right now. I'm just trying to change the geometry of that face of this thing. Flip that around where I can get the other side now. All right, back over there to blue it. We're gonna go through several cycles of this. I'll bring you back in a little bit when we get a little bit closer in. All right, I've probably made, I don't know how many passes on this now, probably 6 or 7. And I've been concentrating on just knocking the top part up here off. It's been a little bit, geometry's not quite right, but we're starting to get some blue back here pretty much all the way across, so it's a sign of a good thing here. Still need to work on my angle down here on this end a little bit more, but we are definitely headed in the right direction. So I'm gonna start trying to really kind of just hit these bluer spots down here. Right now, I may not even try to hit anything down here on this end. Well, I may need to just hit a little bit on the top, but anyway, we're going to continue scraping this on out. All right, we'll go blue it up and keep on working at it. All right, guys, I have been scraping on this thing for probably about an hour and a half, slowly taking it down, and I'm hoping that we're going to have a good print this time. I've gone to actually tightening the gib up in here, setting it about where I probably would set it, maybe just a little bit tighter than what I would normally run it on here. Here we go. Release that out. Now let's see what kind of print we got. All right, so first thing I'll just say here is the way we're doing this, it's hard to get a good print like you would normally. You're going to get some more smearing, but where we're seeing this bluing is pretty much where we're making contact. So what I'm seeing on here is we've got good contact from one end to the other. I'm not seeing the individual points like I like to do when I'm over on a surface plate, but again, we're having to squeeze this tight in there, and you're just going to see some smearing. So, but I'm happy with what I'm seeing here. In fact, I'm probably just going to call this good. Yeah, we got maybe just a little bit of not getting contact in here, and maybe just a little bit down here on the bottom. But you know what, guys, this thing is it's gonna wear in over time, and I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. So there's one other thing I want to just bring up here, and this actually is a question that a viewer sent me via email. I was actually out here scraping on the Gib when the email came in, and he had just recently watched one of my videos and had noticed that we had ground the Gib. And he asked a very good question, and really one that I haven't really thought about before. Well, I have, but not in the way that he asked it. He asked, why do you have to scrape the Gib since it has been ground? Okay, he says, now think about this. Normally, you know, like on ways down here, you would have ground ways. It's all right for one surface to be ground. You want to scrape in the other surface to a ground surface in that case. By doing the scraping, what that gives you is not only a perfect match to that scraped surface, or to that ground surface, but it also gives you where you don't have 100% contact. You don't want to have two ground surfaces rubbing against each other. Why? Have you ever taken two ground surfaces and rubbed them together? What happens? They stick, okay? Two perfectly flat surfaces will stick together. We don't want these ways to stick together, particularly when you put a little bit of oil in there, they will just suck up tight. So with scraping, what you're looking for is you're looking to have very good contact, but you're actually looking for points of contact. And you have these high points and you have the lower points. The lower points will actually allow that oil to get in there, to stay in there, and give you something, a cushion for that to ride on those points that are actually touching. And that is really the big benefit to having a scraped surface. So back to his question, since I had ground the Gib, I would have a ground surface on one side and a scraped surface on the other. Is that okay? Well, the answer is yes and no. So in the situation where you had the ways and you're coming in here and you are bluing up your part and scraping it in to fit that ground surface, absolutely. That's perfectly acceptable. In fact, that's a very, very good situation to have. What I had here, though, was a little bit different situation. Yes, I had a ground surface, but the surface that I was matching to had already been scraped. Okay, so now if I wanted to do that, I could have gone in and I could have done the Gib first and actually blued up the Gib and scraped this into the Gib. In this case, I'd already done this because these have to be perfectly parallel, and that's the way you have to do it, guys. These two surfaces here have to be parallel, so we scraped them in to do that. So even though we had ground that surface, in this situation, I have to match the surfaces. I have to make sure that we have good contact. Just like you saw when we started on this, I had a ground surface, but it wasn't touching in the right plane. It was not perfectly flat. It was probably within maybe a thousandth or two, or maybe even less than that. I didn't measure it. But the bottom line was that ground surface didn't match the surface over here, so we had to scrape it in to match. So very good question. You're thinking really good, but there's a lot of caveats to this. And hey guys, I'm still learning this process. I'm still learning, and I'm having to ask questions myself. But in that situation, yes, even though it was ground, we still need to scrape it in. So before we're totally done with this cross slide piece, I need to do one more thing, and that is I need to cut some oil grooves on the bottom of the turkite where it's going to be riding on here. So I've put a zigzag pattern in here, and basically, again, this is just a place for the oil to get in there, just a little reservoir as this thing goes back and forth, so that oil will continually lubricate up underneath the bottom. Now I've drawn on here with a Sharpie pen, and I realize the glare is kind of bad on this camera, but hopefully you can see my zigzag pattern, and we just need to put a little oil groove in there. And to do that, I'm just going to use a scraper and a little straight edge here to hold it in place. So let me grab a clamp. So I put a little straight edge here, just a guide to go across that piece there, and I'm just going to use a hand scraper here. I've just got my regular blade in here, and we're just going to scratch it in there. So this turkite is fairly soft. You just come in here, make a couple of strokes on it. You don't want to get it too deep. You don't want it to get down to the glue layer in the turkite. I think probably one more stroke here. That's plenty. All right, so I'm gonna go along. I'm gonna do this all the way across this. We'll scratch in that pattern just exactly like that. Again, using that as a guide, and that should give me a good oil groove. So I'll bring you back when I'm done. All right, guys, I think we got our oil grooves in there, and looks good. Looks good. I put the cross slide back together. I've actually got oil in here now, and it moves very, very nicely. There's no side-to-side play in this thing, just like it needs to be. Wow. It's been a long time since I've had a lathe that had a cross slide this nice on it. But before we call this thing quits, I want to check one more time the alignment of my cross slide now that everything is together. Now we tested it, and I'm talking about alignment, I'm talking about being perpendicular to the machine, to the ways. So the carriage is going to move this way. I'm going to make sure this is perfectly perpendicular. So we're going to set it back up again, just like we did when we were scraping this in, and we were using a little indicator to go back and forth. But this time I'm going to mount the indicator on the cross slide, and we're going to check it for squareness here. So let me get that set up, and I'll bring you back in a minute once we get everything set up for that. Well, now for the moment of truth, we want to see how good everything is now that we've got everything back together on the saddle. And so let me explain what we got going on here. So you saw a similar setup to this when we were actually scraping the ways in on this. We were trying to get this thing twisted around so that everything was running perpendicular. So what I'm looking at here is I want this cross slide to be perpendicular to the ways on the machine, so that when I come in here, you know, my machine's going to turn. It's going to turn in this axis when I'm turning a diameter, and then when I'm facing something, I want it to be perpendicular. Almost perpendicular. Actually, what you really want is you want it to be tilted in ever so slightly on the back side here, so that if you're facing something, you want it to be concave on the inside so that it will sit down flat. If you're going the other way, the center's going to be high and it's going to rock around. And when I say by just a little bit, I'm talking about, the book says for a lathe like this, or somewhere between 5 and 8 10,000ths of an inch. You want that thing to be tilted in this way. So that's what we're shooting for. And to do that, we're going to use this setup here. So I've got a granite square in here. This thing is perfectly square. This is a AA granite square, and we verified it. It's in great shape. So first thing I want to do is get this bottom axis down here parallel to the ways. So I've got an indicator on the carriage coming up here. This is a quarter 10,000ths indicator, so 0.00025 inches is the lines on there. I'm going to zoom you in on there and show you that real quick. Hopefully the light's not going to blow this out too much, but I've got it set on 0. I'm going to very carefully now just slide my whole carriage forward, and when I moved it, it jumped there. Let me reset this. So we're back to 0. I'm going to push it, yeah, and let's see what happens here. So when I get down the other end, I mean, it's come over ever so slightly. We might be a 10,000ths off, but this thing is nice and parallel on this side. So now what I'm going to do is get this indicator up onto the face of the granite, and I'm just going to very carefully push it forward. This is a 10,000ths indicator here, so very, very touchy. I'm going to get it right about there. So we're about 3 10,000ths I need to go in this way. So I'm just going to take a little block of wood, and I'm just going to tap on the end of the saddle down here. Bring that to 0. I'm just lightly tapping on it. All right, I think that's good. And now I'm going to move across this way, and we should see the needle rising toward me ever so slightly. And when I get down here, I'm reading about 5 10,000ths. Last time I did this, it was about 6 10,000ths. Get a little bit of variability when we do this, but the bottom line is, and actually it's come back about a 10,000th, so I'm going to do it again. Yeah, still about 5 there. But that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. I want it to move in, move in here so the needle is going in, it's going plus, it's moving in as I go ever so slightly. So I'm very happy with this. I think we got it set up exactly like it needs to be. Well, finally, I think we have our cross slide set up now on the lathe. Everything looks great. Took a little bit more work than I anticipated, having to make a new gib and get all that scraped in. But hey, we're trying to get this lathe really nice, so if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Next step for me is going to be working on getting the screw put back in this and getting the dial on the front where I can adjust it. And one thing that I noticed when I took it apart is we've got a lot of slop in the bronze screw, the nut that goes on this lead screw. So I think I'm going to make a new nut that goes in here, and we're going to have to make that over on the lathe. I got a piece of bronze already here. I've got to get a single tooth Acme threading tool, internal threading bar made specifically for 4 threads per inch. But as soon as I get that done, hopefully we can get over here and get that done and get all this back together. Probably need to go ahead and clean this whole thing back up again and paint it after all this work we've done on the saddle. It's got a few little chips in the paint and a lot of marking blue and everything like that on there. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get that done. Probably go ahead and get this piece painted because it's done. It's pretty much done. And from there, we'll start working on the compound. Also still need to get the apron put back on this. It's already finished. I had restored that previously. It just needs to get reinstalled. So we're making progress. We're getting close. And with that, that's going to be a wrap on this video. So as always, guys, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Leave me some comments, like the video, share the video on social media, all those kinds of good things. And we appreciate everybody watching and everybody being involved in this project. And with that, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.